Coventry, the beautiful hometown that I call home, that I was born and raised in, I want to take you on a little tour, my own sort of personal tour of the sites that I think are important, not necessarily in two-tone history, because there's a little two-tone tour you can do, 7 different places in Coventry where the music kind of came from, in a sense. But I actually want to talk about the bits of Coventry that to me are emblematic of why two-tone came from Coventry, why it had to come from Coventry, and crucially why it couldn't come from anywhere else. We're walking at the moment to a really old bit of Cov, and this is the thing with Coventry. It used to be one of the biggest medieval cities in England, and this is often forgotten about. The one thing everyone knows about Coventry is it was flattened by the Luftwaffe on Blitz night, November the 14th, 1940. But we were doing this to our own city for years and years and years before that, widening roads, tearing down medieval stuff. We've often been a kind of experimental city, almost built from the ground up to a large extent. You really start to see that in this area because you can see the cobblestones. These are old roads. But what happened here on November the 14th, 1940, was that obviously the Luftwaffe filled the sky with firebombs and flattened the whole city. Of course that was important in all kinds of senses. It was important in war history, but it was important in establishing a kind of spirit in Coventry of that this was an experimental zone, a post-war experiment, if you like, of building a city from the ground up, with usually impossibly ambitious ambitions, really. Here we've got the old cathedral. You can see the roof's all gone, but if we go this way, you'll be able to see what was created in its place. And for me, the old cathedral and the new cathedral is really, really emblematic, like I say, of that experimental notion of Coventry. That this was a place that, because it was flattened, because it was wiped clean, we had a chance to just build from the ground up and make up stuff. Make a completely new identity for the city, make a completely new identity for ourselves. And this is, to me, why perhaps two-tone came from here. If you go to other cities like Birmingham, traditional reggae scenes grew up there, Bristol as well. In Coventry, a traditional normal reggae scene was never going to be quite enough. It had to be something unique to us, unique to this place that possibly couldn't have emerged from anywhere else. And consequently, that's why I think two-tone came from it. Let's go and have a look at the cathedral, and you'll see what I mean. This is a new cathedral. I think one of the most sort of, in a sense, moving and poignant buildings in the whole of this country. Built after the old cathedral got bombed out and opened in the early 60s with a requiem by Benjamin Britten, and the Queen opened it. It's a beautiful example of modern architecture, and some of the work inside is amazing. Date of inauguration, 62, early 60s, same time as Jamaican independence, curiously enough, which also of course links through to two-tone. Two-tone had a definite relationship with the 60s, and the reason it had a relationship with the 60s was not only that Coventry was a city that in the 60s established all kinds of new estates, new architecture and new ideas that for a while at least seemed to symbolise all that was hopeful about, you know, post-war Britain. Of course, that hope that then crumbled into despair and disgust in the 70s and 80s, especially in the 70s, which was covered by two-tone. But the reason I wanted to stop here is not because there was any two-tone gigs here or anything crucial in the history of two-tone happened here. The reason I wanted to stop here is to prove that in the 60s, Coventry was a hopeful, booming, creative place. And a large extent of the way that two-tone looked back at the 60s, not only its look and iconography, but also its music, was touching that hopeful sense that the 60s had in Coventry. The estates looked pristine. The new architecture looked beautiful. Designed in the 1930s and actually originally modelled on kind of Egyptian temples and stuff like that. What you'll see is those dreams, they just got derailed. But the architecture became a mess, a hodgepodge, as money took over. And if you wanted to build a big skyscraper, breaking up all the beautiful vistas that should have been here, you were simply allowed. So the reason I wanted to come to the cathedral was because it enshrines for me a moment of 60s hope and a sense of post-war experiment that was crucial to two-tone. The moment that that hope crumbled and destroyed provided the political impetus, I would say, for what two-tone music became. Just pausing briefly to note that this bridge over from the old council house to the new council house, meant to be symbolic of the kind of old and new meeting, is getting torn down on Monday. You have to get used to this living in Coventry. Things that you get used to with your whole life will be torn down in an instant. because of commerce, because of other reasons. That's why, as a Coventrian, I'm constantly used to seeing pastel painted images of our future town. They've suffused my entire life. There'll be another one in the paper tomorrow. There always is. And that kind of fantasy of new living, a new model of living, is, I think, really important to Two-Tone as well, in what it suggests and what it sets up. A completely unique do-it-yourself community. Also, when you're talking about the second Specials album, which we all know is the better one, More Specials, you are absolutely talking about that kind of odd sense of these pastel frightmare visions of the future, this seductive yet completely bullshit image of what the future of this city is going to be. One thing you learn living in this country, in Coventry, is to never really get used to anything or ever think that you have found something, a new low, if you like, because this city will be 2 steps down ahead of you, trashing everything as it goes. And this started before the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe forced the issue and made us rebuild. But people were tearing down medieval stuff in this city from the late 1890s onwards. It has always been a city that is absolutely fearless about destroying its past and building a new future. So, bye-bye, horrible looking bridge. It's gone on Monday. I'm picking out sites that I think are important in proving just what an odd thing Two-Tone was. One of the things that's always said about Two-Tone, especially by people who kind of weren't there or aren't from Cov, is often that it's a gritty reflection of working class struggle, or that it's some sort of gritty reflection of a working class band. The Specials often portrayed as a completely working class band. This is a lie. This is a lie that suits the curators of culture, that doesn't quite fit with the neat categories that they'd like to fit Two-Tone music into. But for instance, I mean, let's have a look at this building over here. This is my old school. It's also Philip Larkin's old school, oddly enough. And it's also Jerry Dammer's old school. This is where he went. Does that look like a working class school to you? Probably not. It's a mock Tudor kind of building, built in the 1850s to look like it was built in the 1560s. And it's one of the poshest schools in Cov. And this is where Jerry went, this is where I went as well. The reason I wanted to show it here was to point out that the Specials were not just an authentic, gritty reflection of working class realities. The Specials, crucially, were a confection, very much like the Rolling Stones in that respect. The Rolling Stones were not just a working class band. I think the Beatles, you could say, working class band. The Kinks even, you could possibly say, working class band, regardless of whether they went to art school or not. The crucial thing about the Stones, and I think the crucial thing about the Specials, was that they were a mix of classes. They were both working class kids and they were both, middle class kids as well. Jerry Dammer was crucially middle class. When he was putting his ideas together, he needed a mouthpiece to say the things he wanted to say, not just about working class life, but about the middle class people that he grew up with and the middle class people that he went to school with. And this is why both the Stones and the Specials have songs like Under My Thumb with the Stones, Stupid Girl by the Stones, Hey Little Rich Girl by the Specials, Rat Race. These are not just working class songs. These are somebody who has kind of lived a middle class life, experienced the bourgeoisie, is kind of seconded by them. And I see that reflected a lot. The crucial thing about Two-Tone was not that it came from one unified place. Jerry went to school here. It's about the expression of the mix of things going on in Coventry, not just ethnically, but also in a class sense. This is a bourgeois school whose fees are now well over £1 a term. And this is where Jerry Dammer's main architect of Two-Tone came from. Something I think left out of a lot of Two-Tone history, is a lot of people like to think of it as a kind of, almost like an 80s version of mod in a sense, a kind of purely working class culture. It isn't. It's more complex than that. And that, to me, is why it's more interesting than simply a single class voice. The crucial thing about Two-Tone was different people from different areas coming together and saying something new. Here's my old school, literally 200 yards down that way is the flat that Terry Hall used to live at in the early 80s. I remember me and my sister went round, when we were big Specials fans, obviously like everyone from Cov was, knocking on his door, flat number 3, and we could see in the mirror down his hallway that he was hiding behind the sofa. He really didn't like the fame, Terry. But, you know, it's odd because Jerry went to school here, Terry lived over there. It was a very close-knit thing, and I can't emphasise enough how Coventry is not a place where you have to cross vast lines to get to places. Places are interconnected because it's a small city. We've only got 300,000 people here. I think if, you know, if Jerry and Terry and all the rest of the guys had been in London, they possibly would have been so strung out from each other that those connections wouldn't have happened. But with a limited town like Coventry is, with a limited amount of places to go and to hang out, people who ordinarily perhaps wouldn't have met will meet, and they'll create fascinating stuff. That's what still kind of gives me hope that something similar to Two-Tone could happen again. Oh, hello. We're in Earlston now, and we're actually sat outside a house, an important house. This is actually a crucial site in Two-Tone history. This is a house on Albany Road in Earlston, in Coventry, where Jerry Dammers lived in the late 70s, when he was in the Coventry Automatics and of course later in the Specials. This is the house that Two-Tone was born in, made in and was run from. Earlston, which is where we're at right now, is kind of a bohemian area of Coventry, if you like. It's kind of like, it's the area where the artists and the musicians kind of lived. The reason Earlston I think is so important, especially in the history of Two-Tone, is down to its location. Yes, it's very central, it's very close to the centre of town. Consequently, easy to get your gear from, say, the Two-Tone house down to Tiffany's and other places in town where you might be playing in the late 70s and early 80s. But racially, it's in an interesting place as well. It backs onto a neighbourhood called Spon End. Now, Spon End is an area that has a massive, massive Afro-Caribbean population and always has done ever since the kind of Windrush arrival in the late 50s and also, of course, migration to this city in the 60s. In Spon End, at the very edge of Spon End, a sort of legendary club in the history of Two-Tone, I guess, the Holyhead Club, was a place that, for the Afro-Caribbean community, hosted straight-up reggae nights, reggae shebeens and reggae blues parties, where people like Jerry and Terry, middle-class boy from Leamington after all, could come and experience that culture and soak it up. So consequently, Earlston's really important, I would say, in the history of Two-Tone, in that it's a meeting place. It's a meeting place, as I keep saying, between people who ordinarily perhaps wouldn't meet, but came together to create this marvellous bastardised form, this agglomeration that was Two-Tone. So I can't emphasise enough how Two-Tone is a bastard art. It's not a pure thing, it's a bastardised agglomeration of different classes and races. And it was inevitable, I think, that it would happen here in Earlston because it's so central to it. But if you could just point that way, what you can see down there is a pub called the Albany. Great venue, a lot of good gigs I've seen there. As you can see now, to let, shut down last Saturday actually, just like most of the venues in Coventry. The opportunities for people to come together and create culture are dwindling in this city, just like they're dwindling across this country, but in this city in particular, there's hardly anywhere to play anymore. And that's why I wonder whether something as miraculous as Two-Tone would ever occur again. The last location we're at is a place called Foleshill Road in Coventry, and it's for purely personal reasons that I want to be here. Back in about 1980, when the Specials had really kind of made it and were pop stars to a large extent, this used to be a shop, an Asian draper's shop, and like any other kid at the time, massively into Two-Tone. I had my Harrington jacket, which was part of the uniform, obviously, and this is the shop that I came to, where they'd sew letters in the back of your jacket for 10p a letter. And I had Specials in the back of mine. My mate had Madness in the back of his. We used to argue about that. But the reason I wanted to talk about that is because one thing that is often missed out with Two-Tone things is just exactly how much it appealed to kids. And I mean kids, not teenagers. It wasn't like punk in that regard. It wasn't like other subcultures that appealed to people who are about to be adults. It was a subculture that appealed to everybody, but in particular, I would say, little kids. We loved the music because it was so danceable. We loved bands like Madness as well because they were so funny. But that was a crucial element of two-tone's appeal, that it wasn't cooler than now, and it wasn't an exclusive or elitist thing. It included everyone in this city, including us kids, so we could feel part of it. We'd get our Harringtons, we'd get our little pairs of Docks and our braces, and we'd feel part of two-tone, especially coming from Coventry. So even though this isn't a historical place in two-tone history, it's historical to me because it reminds me of just how much this music meant to me when I was a nipper. And though other subcultures will come and go, I suspect that no subculture will have that appeal to really young kids again, like two-tone did, not a musical subculture anyway. And that's why this place is important to me. This place over the road here used to be called the General Wolf. It was a pub. It used to be a vital place, vital venue for Coventry musicians to play at, and the specials played there often. As you can see, like virtually every other venue that you're going to see in Coventry, it's been shut down. And it makes me think, even though this has history to it, as to whether that history is now over and can never be repeated or reignited. I suspect not. The diversity of Coventry is still here. The experimentalism of Coventry is still here. What's been derelicted, what's been destroyed, is an ability for the citizens of Coventry, all of them, different colours and different creeds, to come together in cultural places and create something. That's what's been lost. The diversity, you can see it all around you. Different cultures speaking to each other still happens, but it doesn't happen in pubs. It doesn't happen in venues anymore. It doesn't happen in places where musicians and artists gather. So if you ask me, could two-tone happen again? Could something similar happen again? I've got to say I don't think so. Whilst this government stays in power, and whilst the ravages of post-Brexit Britain continue to rumble on and basically dwindle our culture massively, I can't see it happening again. A tragic shame, and maybe these things can happen in a virtual space rather than a real space, but something has been lost, something fatal has been lost. I'm still massively, massively proud of this city. I'm massively proud of its experimental nature. I'm massively proud of the fact that two-tone came from here, because I still think it's some of the greatest music ever made. But I don't hold out much hope that similar cultural manoeuvres could be made in this day and age. In all kinds of ways, we are being divided off from each other and sold off to the highest bidder. So whilst I'm still massively proud to come from here, I don't hold out much hope that something as miraculous, remarkable, magical and fun as two-tone could ever happen again. Enjoy the films you're going to watch, because they'll snapshot a time when this culture, two-tone culture, was alive and well in the streets of Coventry. I hope you enjoyed a little trip around Coventry, and I hope you enjoy the films that you're going to see, which will bring out more of the things that I've hopefully been talking about, but also give you a real snapshot of what two-tone culture was like when it was happening. Thanks for listening.